All right, well, I think it's time, so I have some brief introductory remarks before we get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the second annual Generative AI in Libraries, or GAIL, conference. My name is Bree Kirsch, and I'll be the moderator for this session, titled Ships and Shipwrecks: How Public Libraries Will Navigate the Age of AI. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Conference Planning Committee for their help in planning this conference, especially Ginny Pannebecker at Virginia Tech for hosting the conference, and the GAIL conference support team. So thank you everyone for all your help. This is a volunteer-run conference, and I really appreciate all your hard work throughout the year to prepare for this. So before we begin, we do have a few reminders. And let me get my links together here. We do have a code of conduct that we will adhere to for this conference, and I will post the link into the chat. So there's a link to our code of conduct, and if you do experience any issues related to conduct, please do contact us via email at gailconferencesupport@googlegroups.com. And please be sure your microphone is muted throughout the conference, not for this session since it's a webinar format, but for other sessions, please be sure your microphone is muted, and then wait until you're invited to unmute before asking questions verbally. But you are also welcome to use chat for questions as well. This session is being recorded, and you can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Nick Tanzi, who is Assistant Director of South Huntington Public Library, an internationally recognized library technology consultant and author of the books Making the Most of Digital Collections Through Training and Outreach in 2016 and Best Technologies for Public Libraries, Policies, Programs, and Services in 2020. Tanzi is a past column editor for Public Library Magazine's The Wired Library and was named a 2025 Library Journal Mover and Shaker. Please join me in welcoming Nick Tanzi.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. Hope everybody's doing well. So one of the things I want to start off by saying is I'm here to share a public library perspective, but I want to emphasize it's a public library perspective, right? Not the public library perspective. We are many. We have different ideas, different feelings about generative AI, different experiences. But my hope is to give you some of that public library perspective, the things we're grappling with, the opportunities we see, the concerns we have, and at least what I feel like is an appropriate response and an appropriate relationship with generative AI. Even as I talk about the public library experience, I imagine you're going to see a lot of commonality, regardless of whether you're in a special library, academic, school library. Many of us are still grappling with the same things. And I would say separately, the solution, the infrastructure, the groundwork that we all have to build in the age of AI, we are doing collectively. In particular, many of my colleagues at academic libraries are building the frameworks and foundations that I think are going to serve us well. Now, we know that technological change is not new. Technological change has always been part of the library experience. I think sometimes folks have decide that somehow we're newcomers to emerging technologies, but we're not. Technology is kind of the air we breathe in libraries. And if you've worked in a library for any amount of time, you know this. You know how you've navigated technological change. And we engage with technology for any number of reasons. Foremost, I think it's mission alignment. Many of us, if we compare notes about our mission statements, will say things like we meet the informational needs, the recreational needs of our community, we foster curiosity, we explore new ideas. So emerging technologies always aligns with the library's mission. We also engage with technology for operational efficiency. And that can be a scary term when we think about agentic AI, right? Sometimes it sounds like replacement. It sounds like it comes with a pink slip. But operational efficiency, ultimately, we're talking about being able to do things a little quicker, a little faster, higher quality. And we've always made adaptations, changes, and used technology as a way to deliver services quicker, to increase ease of use, to create what efficiencies we can. We engage with emerging technologies to retain relevance. It's not that we change our mission, it's not that we change what we do, but sometimes we change how we do it. And think about, when media increasingly went digital, what did libraries do? We embraced the ebooks, we embraced streaming media. Um, when things went to the cloud, we did that with Library 2.0. So we change as technology changes to continue in service of the library mission, again, of meeting the informational, the recreational needs of our community, of preparing people, for the job market, of lifelong learning, all of those things. Change, and in particular, technological change, oftentimes causes disruption. It can be a disruptive event. It can result in job loss. It can shake up the economy. It can require new skills. It can confuse people. It can create inequities, the haves and the have-nots. And libraries, and in particular our public libraries, have always had a special place in navigating disruption, in upskilling people, in delivering the access that they need, in retraining the workforce, in providing accurate information when there's a lot of confusion that often results in a new technology popping up. Then there's the novelty factor, and I don't think we can ignore the novelty factor. When a new technology comes out, there's excitement around it. It's neat, it's cool to see a new thing, and we are in the business of delivering access to that new thing, that new experience. That's part of that entertainment factor. That being said, novelty is not a long-term strategy, right? Imagine if I'm performing a magic trick, I pull a coin out from behind your ear. That might be cool the first time or even the first 5 times I do that, but eventually that novelty wears off. So novelty is a good thing. It can be an exciting thing, but that's not the long-term strategy. It's not just doing a thing to do a thing. It's not just a shiny object that we have to avoid chasing. There needs to be a long-term plan behind it. It needs to be thoughtful. And then there's digital equity. Think about digital equity in terms of the access to the hardware, the software, the internet connection that a person needs to fully participate in society. And we recognize that that's a moving target. In particular, the pandemic, what did digital equity mean for me? It meant that I needed more laptops because I was working virtually. My wife was working virtually. My child was going to school virtually on a Chromebook. I needed higher bandwidth. We all needed Zoom connections and Google Classroom. So suddenly full participation changed. We also provide critical access. New technology typically is prohibitively expensive. It becomes organizationally affordable before the end user. Think about something like the 3D printer. 3D printer came out, not everybody had one in their own house, right? It's too expensive, but a library can afford that organizationally first. And then we help demystify a technology, we provide that critical access. Despite our long and successful relationship in adopting new technologies and adapting to new technologies, we know that there are always naysayers, right? People who don't understand the library. And they will say some version of, why do I need the library when I have? And in 1993, what was that? The World Wide Web. I have the internet. Why do I need libraries? 1998, why do I need libraries when I have Google? 2007, the Kindle, Amazon Kindle e-reader. Why do I need libraries in 2010 when I have the iPad? And we begin to see that, right, in the age of AI. 2022 is a watershed moment with ChatGPT. You can expect to hear more of that as agentic AI progresses. But despite these challenges, despite these seeming threats to the library's business model, What we actually did was we became the experts of these technologies. We lent the ebooks. We taught search strategies and internet safety. We upskilled our community. Our collections went digital. Um, so these things are often perceived as a threat, and then the library adapts and adopts them. Now, earlier I mentioned that we provide critical access, digital equity, right? But in the year 2025, our public libraries are experiencing a bit of a strange access problem. We're used to new technologies being prohibitively expensive and our users needing us for access. That's not really how the age of AI seems to be progressing, right? Because AI is everywhere. We have a different access problem. The problem is that everybody has access to a technology, or I should say, let me qualify that. A lot of people have access to AI, but they don't necessarily have the underlying skills, the understanding to use it effectively or safely. We're seeing generative AI popping up in smartphone integration, right? Android now is like having Gemini built into it, or with the iPhone, Apple Intelligence. If you are using a desktop or laptop, the strong likelihood is it's a Windows operating system, and Copilot is being built in. Social media, Meta AI, for example, you now have access via Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, um, to generative AI, to a chatbot, to text to image generators. And I love this quote from Luke Swarthout, and that is that staying on the internet while opting out of AI will quickly become a false choice. We know this. We can see this as the internet is shaped by generative AI. Now, none of this happened in a vacuum. There is a pandemic effect as well. And for many of our public libraries, and I imagine if you look at your own library, academic library, school library, the pandemic really impacted our physical locations, and it resulted in a virtualization of many of our workspaces. Many of us moved to Canva, many of us moved to Google Workspace or Office 365. And these workspaces increasingly are becoming suites of generative AI software. So even as we moved into these virtualized workspaces, AI, generative AI, insinuated itself into these workspaces and became kind of a core component of them. As a result, staff who are immersed in this technology are discovering lots of utility in generative AI as a communication tool. So many of the folks who need to rephrase an email or reformat a memo are finding real utility in this technology. As a brainstorming tool, um, as a sounding board, our marketing teams are finding real utility. If you write copy, you can really struggle to find that real buzzy way of saying something, that eye-catching headline. You're often dealing with space constraints. And generative AI is highly effective at being able to rephrase, reformat, better explain. Um, we are experiencing a lot of caution around search. Staff is dabbling with AI-powered search with mixed results, but increasingly view AI, I think, appropriately as a tool and not as a source. And I think that's an important distinction to make. And then there's experimentation. Now, I put safe in quotations here because not everybody is necessarily experimenting safely. We need to be aware of data privacy, right? In particular, in public libraries, it is often a legal requirement that we keep library records confidential, and that includes things like reference transactions. So we do need to be careful about how we interact with generative AI, that we're not feeding personally identifiable information into these systems, for example. But when we talk about more public-facing documents, at my own library, our emerging technologies librarian was experimenting with creating, using Notebook LM, a library policy chatbot that actually is highly effective at, you ask it how many vacation days am I entitled to as a full-time employee, or can I notarize that? and it gives very accurate information and can be a real time saver. And it gives inline citations. We're talking RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that we'll see increasingly insinuate itself into library databases, for example. Now, this is one of these quotes that I find evergreen, but I think it's particularly salient when we talk about generative AI and the library. This is from Paul Virilio. He was a French cultural theorist, and he says, when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. Things are often rarely just purely good or purely bad. And in the case of emerging technologies, there is that disruptive effect that we need to be aware of. There is the unknown. There is the unintended consequences, and we need to identify those, particularly early in our relationship with generative AI. We need to identify the shipwrecks so that we can mitigate that disruption and that we can proceed safely. By way of example, from the World Economic Forum, when they look at some of the top global threats, what is the number one short-term threat? And it is that of misinformation and disinformation. And we know that much like the age of the internet, the age of AI is one that increases the quantity, but not necessarily the quality of information. It's a complication of the information landscape. Generative AI, text to image generators, or in particular text to video, if any of you have seen VO3 recently, it is difficult to discern AI generated content from reality. And this is a widely unregulated space. So we need to be concerned about this. We are information specialists, and we now have to navigate a much more complex information environment. We're seeing that in AI generated books of various quality. Here on the left, you see this headline: Amazon needed to pull down a number of books that were AI generated that were about, a field guide to mushrooms. What is safe to eat? Now, we all make different decisions of different consequence. I would say, is that safe to eat? Should I put that in my mouth? Is a highly consequential decision that you want to get right. You don't want to eat poison. For society that is not prepared, doesn't have the information literacy to use these tools effectively, here in my home state of New York, we had attorneys who used AI, used ChatGPT to draft a legal argument, and it cited fake case law, and the two attorneys were sanctioned and had said they were not aware that ChatGPT or AI more broadly could make stuff up. They're unaware of AI hallucinations. So this is a knowledge gap that libraries really need to fill. And I am a Google power user. I like Google. I have Android phones. I love Android products. But I will say that this experimental phase has really impacted that first page of Google results. The knowledge panel can be of various quality. Sometimes it's great and it's intuitive. And sometimes it says I can get more iron in my diet by eating rocks. Technically true, probably harmful. And it's always an arms race, search engine optimization, and AI-driven websites are finding ways to float to the top, but not by merit. They may not have the most accurate information. Now, this is chaos, right? But this is an opportunity. This is where accurate information is more precious. And these tools needed to critically evaluate AI's output are, at a premium. Along those lines, it is essential that libraries protect what we have, and what we have are good sources of information. Uh, Short story here. My daughter, she loves to watch movie trailers, anything Marvel, anything Star Wars, and we'll watch them together oftentimes. Whatever's coming out soon. She really likes to get a jump on that. And one day she came to me and she was upset because a number of times she would go to watch a new trailer for a movie and it was a fake trailer. It was AI generated, and she felt like she had been had. And she wanted to know, how am I supposed to know what's a real trailer when these all look so real? And we talked a bit, and what we finally settled on was it's down to sources. If you want the accurate, the real Marvel trailer, go to Marvel's YouTube page, right? Go straight to the source. So as the output of AI is increasingly difficult to differentiate between what is real and what is fake, right? Real image, real video, or AI generated, the last safeguard we have is well-curated, accurate sources. So we need to keep an eye on our reference databases. We need to keep an eye on our digital collections as AI-generated content of various quality makes its way in. And at a minimum, need that kind of disclosure, but also need to be a bit aggressive with our vendors on what is acceptable, because that is the space that we have maximum influence, right? Our own library vendors and our own expectations of the quality control that's being performed, because these are sources that we don't always curate ourselves. Sometimes we're buying access to them. We are finding now censorship is not new. This has been a few years now of increased censorship on attacks on the freedom to read, on intellectual freedom. And we need to be aware that AI can do listen, it can increase access to good information. It can do things like perform diversity audits on library collections, but it can also be a tool for censorship. And we have seen now Mason City School District in Iowa, for example, is using ChatGPT to determine what books should be banned. They supply ChatGPT with a list of their titles. They supply ChatGPT with the policy in terms of restricting access of some materials to minors. And taking the librarian out of that decision making, they have the AI perform that work and decide what books need to be removed from the collection. That should concern us all. But AI can democratize access to information. It has the ability to empower users, to increase our ability to communicate, to remove things like language barriers, to make search less Boolean and more conversational with natural language processing. We're always looking to make our catalogs easier to use. You know, sometimes misspelling a word can be the death of your internet or your catalog search. You retrieve no, your retrieval ends up with 0 because you misspelled a word. Intuiting what somebody is looking for is super important. So it can really aid in information seeking. It can remove language barriers. It can do, especially with multimodal AI, we'll be able to interpret audio and visual data in real time to be able to do things like provide subtitles for the world, potentially to do things like translate American Sign Language in real time. It can augment but not replace expertise. Here on the right, you see the Project Gutenberg Open Audiobook Collection. This is using AI narration to create audiobooks of tens of thousands of public domain books. That increases accessibility. But a word of caution, even as we acknowledge how artificial intelligence and generative AI can increase accessibility, we need to make sure that it is not used as a shield against valid criticism. There have been any number of times, and we see this image here, right? This is a park bench where the middle has been cut out and a handicap spot has been put up. And what that really is that's anti-homeless architecture disguised as accessibility. There are plenty of good things about artificial intelligence, but on occasion, in order to try to short circuit valid criticism of the many concerns we have with this technology, we bring up the disabled community or accessibility as a shield against valid criticism. We should not be doing that. Now, at present, many of our libraries lack a firm AI foundation to build on. And that is not to say that we don't have a history of success, right? Navigating technologies, we absolutely do. However, the building blocks are not in place at the moment. Some of our immediate work that we need to do is to reconcile library professional ethics with the many lines of friction we have with generative AI. Issues of privacy, of algorithmic bias, the environmental impact. As of 2019, 2019 we basically ALA has sustainability as a core value of the librarianship. And we know that there's a carbon footprint attached to this technology that is growing, and there's a tremendous amount of water usage with this technology. We need to be clear, and we should always ask ourselves, is it worth the cost, right? We need to develop the framework for assessment of different tools and their output. We need to train staff. We need to develop effective library policy and procedure. Those are all the things that come first that will ensure future success, right? If we just proceed without laying the groundwork, nothing good can come of that. So how do we navigate this environment? It's a exciting but chaotic environment. I don't expect a lot of regulation anytime soon. In fact, the energy is on the side of deregulation. So there's not a lot of guardrails right now. So that being said, we have to build those things. We have to build the safeguards in our libraries. And it begins with fostering AI literacy. If you want, only good things can come out of a foundation of AI literacy. I do like this definition from nonprofit Digital Promise, and that is that AI literacy is the knowledge and skills that enable humans to critically understand, evaluate, and use AI systems and tools to safely and ethically participate in an increasingly digital world. And here is where I have to give a shout out to our colleagues in academic libraries. Sandy Herveau, Amanda Wheatley are doing amazing work. This is a white paper I have linked to, and I believe I have the PDF in the documents as well that are attached to this webinar. But they have a framework providing instruction, 6 frames for AI literacy, and they include to know the basic principles of artificial intelligence, to understand the fundamental differences of AI types, to experiment with AI tools, to review the outputs and outcomes of AI tools, to evaluate the impact of AI on a societal scale, and to engage with AI discourse. And in particular, I think it is so important to stay engaged, whether you are somebody who's an AI skeptic or an AI enthusiast, because the situation is a changing one. And there are companies who you might like their practices today and not like it tomorrow, or you may have concerns and as a regulatory environment takes shape, feel much better or have better options available to you. So staying engaged is so essential because this is not a static situation. And we need to be effective, able to effectively prompt, right? Prompt generative AI. And here, shout out to Dr. Leo Lowe, University of New Mexico, for the CLEAR framework. That stands for concise, logical, explicit, adaptive, reflective. Concise, straight to the point. Logical. Does it make sense to you, the human? If it doesn't make sense to you, the human, probably doesn't make sense to the AI that's doing natural language processing. Explicit, that's another way of saying clear, not cursing at it. Adaptive, we need to modify our approach. Adaptive is extremely important. For example, if you've used Copilot, you know how sometimes it has different modes. It has a concise mode, it has a creative mode. You can experiment with different modes, or you can ask the same question different ways, because AI is math. It's probabilistic math, and it has a habit of considering or equating popularity with correctness. The most likely thing as being the most right thing. And that's not how the world works. That's a way for unpopular ideas to not surface. So by being adaptive in our approach, we are more likely to get better results. And then reflective, you look back at your prompt, at the results, at the output, at what sources are provided, and see if that yielded a good, a good outcome. And as we learn effective prompting, and as students or users or patrons or colleagues go and cite AI, right? Provide an AI disclosure, part of that disclosure can be the prompt that they used, and you can actually evaluate that prompt and see, was that destined to yield good or bad information? That's part of that process as information professionals. When I talk about policy foundation, one of the most important things we should be doing is developing a tool usage policy, because we're all using AI within the context of our jobs. I use AI, my colleagues use AI, but we don't necessarily have clarity on what is organizationally appropriate. And that's not a great space to be in. So what organizational guidance can we have? Well, an AI tool usage policy that talks about how to effectively evaluate a tool, potentially provides a whitelist of approved tools, speaks to the protection of confidential data, of access control, and compliance with existing security policies will go a long ways to ensuring that staff use is safe, appropriate, and effective. So sometimes you need to respond to a technology with specific policy aimed at that technology, right? And other times, technological change requires that we review policy. Listen, the internet broke a lot of policy that we had, a lot of well-intentioned policy. Uh, and in this instance, when you're reviewing, and should always be reviewing policy every few years, do it with the awareness of the capabilities of generative AI and see, does that policy, has it aged well? Do I need to make changes? Not every policy need, address AI directly in order to address AI more broadly. What I mean by that is, I don't need to have specific language governing the addition of AI generated materials in my collection development policy, as much as I just need some standards and some quality control that I perform, and generative AI either meets that or does not. I may say that I need reviews. I only purchase materials from reviewed sources. That would govern AI without ever mentioning AI. When we talk about assessment, here I want to shout out to Sarah Treibelhorn, sustainabilities librarian at San Diego State University. She has developed an ethical AI assessment tool. It's available via Creative Commons, and it provides benchmarks for fairness and bias, transparency and explainability, privacy and security, the environmental impact, accountability and oversight, and the social impact. And this is where, again, we're trying to determine what an appropriate relationship with a powerful and seemingly omnipresent technology is. And we're doing all of that work together. We went from chaos to we're building the frameworks, the assessment tools, all of that infrastructure that we need to successfully engage with this technology. Now, we need to teach our communities to engage with AI safely and effectively. And our challenge is that we're both learning and trying to teach at the same time. So we need to quick and study up and then turn those newly developed skills outwards. Focus on accessing AI, on demystifying AI, focused on programs on media literacy. Here in the United States, there's only like a handful of states, 4 or 5 states, that mandate media literacy education for K through 12 students. That was pre-AI. It is at a premium now. It is necessary that we teach media literacy in the age of AI. That we teach that ethical foundation on people understand the ethics so that they can make the best informed decision for themselves. To demystify popular tools that are in the public consciousness, your ChatGPTs, your Midjourneys, your Canvas, your Claudes. That we teach effective prompt strategies, the way to effectively search a changing internet, just like we did in the 90s with the advent of the World Wide Web. And that we teach privacy settings, managing that digital footprint, because your privacy is increasingly rare and precious in the age of AI, and the consequences for not maintaining it are higher than ever before in a world of deepfakes. And your overarching goal is to create informed citizens. Now, I would say that public libraries are uniquely positioned for success in the age of AI. When a new technology pops up, there's a lot of people that are caught in the lurch, right? If you're not in school and there's not an existing curriculum, either in grade school or high school or secondary education, then guess what? The only thing you have available to you is lifelong learning that is part and parcel of what the public library does. So we can provide that runway while formal education catches up and develops a curriculum for that next generation. We have always provided workforce development, upskilling, job reskilling, and that will be especially important in the age of AI, where generative AI is expected to at least disrupt 1 in 4 jobs. We have a proven track record of navigating technological change as libraries. Remember the list, and we can go back further than that. And ultimately, the library brand is exceedingly valuable in the age of AI. The things that we associate with the library, accurate information, is so big in the age of AI when it's difficult to know what's real and what's not. Um, Privacy is increasingly precious, and it's something that public libraries have always respected. Free inquiry. And then finally, we are community-based organizations that are human-based. And that is essential because getting a customer service representative, a human, to hear your problem and address your needs is going to be at a premium in the age of AI. So having a human, having that social interaction is huge, and that's something that we've long done. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you found that interesting. And at this point, I'm happy to take any, I guess, Bree, if we do Q&A at this point.
Yes, we have several already in the
Okay.
Q&A feature, so thank you for those of you that submitted questions already. If you do have questions for Nick, please submit them in the Q&A feature, and then we'll go through and answer as many as we have time for in the next 7 or 8 minutes. So the first one that I see is, Nick, can you share more about your thoughts around the AI-generated response in Google?
Short answer is I don't like it. It's wrong enough to make me deeply suspicious of it. Sometimes it really crushes the answer, and I'm very happy with it. But I tend to be suspicious unless I'm in a position to do the quality assurance. I need to know enough about the topic at hand, and that's often not how we search. We search for an answer because we don't know it. Um, so I've always viewed generative AI as best used as an augmentation of existing experience. When you do that, it's fantastic and is really a force multiplier, and you're in the driver's seat because you know the answer. But again, stay engaged because they may figure it out and it may improve over time. But I treat it like kind of like a new coworker. I'm like, I don't know if I want to sign that work out until I know how well you do and what you're good at.
And another question, how do you recommend we balance the often competing values of fair use and intellectual property?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to me, this is one of the most difficult, in part because we need to understand that legal and ethical are 2 different things. And there's a lot of concern about AI generated images, and is that fair use or not? And at present, it seems like the energy is on the side of the input, the ingestion of all that stuff to build a training model. US Copyright Office increasingly seems to be saying that's fair use. And we feel a lot of ick about that because of that lack of consent. And they're saying to police the output, what you actually generate may be a copyright violation or not. So that would answer your legal question if it breaks that way, but that doesn't answer your ethical question if you still feel icky about it. And library ethics have always said that we balance the rights of the information seeker and the rights holder, and that we don't let our personal beliefs, get in the way of the provision of services. So we have a lot of things that are seemingly in conflict, and I think it's going to be messy.
Another question, you mentioned early in the webinar about agentic AI. They are unfamiliar with this. Can you please explain what it is?
Think of AI with a little more autonomy, like, like if I use my Google Assistant and it can go out and actually perform research and document what it's done, it can perform tasks seemingly autonomously, and you're going to see more and more of that.
And how do we develop public library AI policy which is not restrictive but covers ethics?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say some of the things I prioritize, again, is an AI tool use policy, is looking at what does my existing ethics mean, right? And then what does that say about generative AI? And likely it'll say things like, you should not be putting personally identifiable information into these systems, by way of example. Um, on my slides, and I hate to, if you go to my website too, I have a recent piece I wrote that's about AI policy, that's public library focused. And it links to, because we're all policy pirates, two public library policies that I thought were pretty good starters.
Great. And can you recommend a roadmap for a library who is newly integrating AI?
Now, if that person has the opportunity to follow up a little bit on what they mean by integrating, sometimes we mean I'm just dabbling with it, versus it's being built into the library experience. But what I would say is, just broadly speaking, what are the pillars? Policy, staff training, right, are going to be two of your keys, because policy will tell you kind of what you're allowed to do. And that will help you understand what use cases you actually want to train staff for and what tools may be even acceptable organizationally.
And can you repeat what you said about not using accessibility as an excuse for XYZ?
Yeah,
Somebody responded to that. Accessibility is not a shield against valid criticism.
yep. So there have been times when recently there was the National Writers, forgetting the contest they did, but there was a whole debate over, should you be allowed to use AI to generate your writing? And there was a lot of criticism because there was an attempt to just shut down the inclusion of AI into this contest as just saying, well, you're disadvantaging the disabled community without ever really engaging with that disabled community on whether that's how they felt. Plus, communities were not a monolith. So we have to be careful with that. So you can both say AI has a lot of utility and a lot of potential and can really increase accessibility, and also say I have privacy concerns or I have copyright concerns. All of these things, you can have two competing ideas that exist simultaneously. So point being, it should never be a short circuit to that conversation, either way.
What do you identify as the biggest threat that AI poses to libraries?
It's weird because it's both the threat and the opportunity. And I think it is very much, I don't worry so much about agentic AI because I think human-based services it's going to be like people rediscover people and how nice it is to talk to a human. So I don't worry about that. Most of my anxiety has always been on the information space. I mean, I feel like maybe even a few years ago, we've already lost kind of that shared reality, um, post-truth society and all that. But what is real, what is fake, what is a good source, and making sure that the sources we maintain, our databases, our collections, do not get poisoned by bad output from AI, but rather that AI is enhancing access to good information that we're curating. And that's a tricky balancing act.
How can library IT make AI tools available to staff when there's no one size fits all?
Yeah, I mean, it is really tricky, but I would say first off, you need to at least develop a whitelist would be a good thing. What meets the criteria for an acceptable tool? Um, in the case of my library right now, we are Google Workspace, and kind of Google simultaneously gave us access to Gemini and also charged us, and we didn't ask for it. So we have to figure this out. So that for us prioritized, because this was an organization-wide tool that was available for all staff. So that was an easy choice for us because it was like it was here and we're paying for it, and we kind of built into our workspace. But developing that criteria is going to go a long ways to what comes next. If it doesn't make the whitelist, half your work is done there.
Well, we have reached time. I'm going to ask one more, hopefully short question. And unfortunately, we won't have time for the rest. I apologize, everyone. Where does the 1 in 4 jobs will be disrupted number come from? Do you think it's well-founded?
So there has been so much discourse, right? I have heard some figures that say um, it's going to be a wash. It's going to create as many jobs as it eliminates. In the case of that, I wish I had, this is terrible library practice for me because I don't have my source on the top of my head. But it was not elimination of jobs. It was more displacement. It would change how they were performed. And I don't find that figure unusual when we think about how it's changing something like the internet. But shame on me for not having that factoid readily available. Trust me, bro, is not something you want to do in the age of AI.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for your wonderful keynote. And thank you everyone for joining. And we have about 14 minutes until the next session start for a little break. So thank you everyone for joining us for our first session.
All right, thanks, all.